Hello and welcome to the CEO Blindspots show, where leaders lead leaders. I'm your host, Birgit Kamps, and today's guest is Cory Klippsten, who's the CEO and founder of Swan Bitcoin, a company that empowers businesses and individuals to gain wealth and keep their wealth through secure custody and customized financial planning. So welcome to the show, Cory.
Birgit, thank you so much for having me on. This is so fun.
Yes, well, as you know, I'm one of your clients, and the show's called CEO Blindspots, and a lot of CEOs I know don't understand the value of Bitcoin and are still, wondering about, is that truly a store of wealth and should they use it in their business? So I would love to get your insights as to how you view that and what you would tell CEOs who don't really understand Bitcoin or believe that it's a good idea.
Yeah, so this is going to be interesting because we're not going to go straight to recommendations because there's essentially a path that people and those folks that run businesses tend to follow that is around education and learning about the asset, learning about Bitcoin. Because if you don't, just like anything, if you don't understand what you bought and why, you'll freak out if the price goes down or if something goes wrong. And that's why, they say, I mean, I've seen a lot of studies on this, but 95 to 96% of day traders tend to buy high, or I'm sorry, yeah, buy high and sell low. They chase shiny objects and then they freak out at the wrong time. So like the price of a stock that you really, really believe in and you kind of know it's amazing. I think we all have, some friend in our circle or colleague that was into Tesla, 10 years ago. And whenever the price crashed 50% because Elon said the wrong thing or something, they used that as an opportunity to buy more.
Yeah.
And, folks like you, our private clients at Swan that have been around for 5 years, 8 years, whatever, they'll tend to buy Bitcoin like crazy when it's on sale because they have a very firm picture of where it's going. But somebody that maybe didn't do the homework and didn't get to the point where they kind of understand or have like a real belief or even have a sense of knowledge and understanding that they know where this thing is going. If you don't have that, it's really, really scary to try to weather the volatility because Bitcoin is obviously known for massive price spikes and huge drawdowns.
Yeah.
And, that volatility is the price that you pay for performance. So, on a risk reward basis, it dominates any other asset out there. But that's because the performance is so high when you divide it by the volatility. The volatility is still more than most of these other asset classes. And it's really hard for people to weather those storms. So that's what I would say on that topic.
The
Just to
particular
introduce,
book you recommend, Cory, that someone can
I
start their
have so many books to recommend.
and you have on your site also
We
some
do. We do.
resources.
We do. So, look, I met my co-founder and Swan CTO, Jan Pritzker, because he wrote what I considered and still do consider the best introduction to Bitcoin, which was called Inventing Bitcoin.
Mhm.
Luckily, he lets us give away his book for free on the Swan site. So you can literally go to swan.com/free book and download an audio or text version of Inventing Bitcoin, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
I will say, and I know you know this, one of the first topics that you have to hit to help people understand, what Bitcoin is and why it matters is really just an understanding of money itself. So understanding the history of money and how does the current fiat system with kind of government printed money actually work and those kinds of things. So I would say the top reco that I have on the broader subject, that's a longer read. Jan's book is probably 2.5 hours. It's not hard to just kind of get up to speed on Bitcoin. I'd really recommend Broken Money by Lynn Alden. It's fantastic. It came out last year. It was an Amazon bestseller in a bunch of different categories, #1 in multiple categories. And it really is just fantastic. And she comes at it more from like an investor's or a business perspective, finance and econ background, but also really deeply understands Bitcoin. So I highly recommend Broken Money by Lynn Alden as well.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, and then I do have to ask, of course, you didn't start your career with Swan. I mean, you worked for Google, you worked for McKinsey and Company, you worked for Morgan Stanley, and then fast forward, here you are. So
Yeah.
you came from what people would say more of a traditional environment, right? And big companies. And then you not only did you then now become co-founder or founder of Swan, but also took the leap into the entrepreneur world.
Mm-hmm.
So I really have two questions. You can answer them in any order. Number one, what were some of the blind spots you encountered when you switched from the corporate world to entrepreneur world? And then number two, who first introduced you to Bitcoin, or why did you even go down that road?
Absolutely. So yeah, so that path was for me, it was basically kind of a big company career from about 98 to 2013. And it was probably about 2000, I think in the financial crisis of 2009, I started to think about getting out of management consulting and private equity and moving over into early stage tech. I had a lot of friends in really starting in the New York tech ecosystem from my early career. I had a lot of friends that had companies and were in venture and things like that. And then I started to meet a lot more people in Silicon Valley while I was at Google from 2011 to 2013, and that gave me kind of the launch pad to be able to. I
Mhm.
didn't want to enter like at the bottom, so I was able to kind of cross over, closer to a good level, kind of talking to all the partners and the owners of the firms and and basically what worked for me is I think because I had only worked at large companies and I had run my own services firm for a few years, but it wasn't really something that was built for scale. So it's very different from taking venture capital and trying to hyperscale things and scaling with code and media instead of capital and labor, as they say,
Yeah.
famous Naval quote. And so I just didn't feel like I was ready to start something myself. So what ended up happening is I essentially served a 7-year apprenticeship in startups and venture by being an angel investor and an advisor to Silicon Valley venture-backed CEOs for 7 years from 2013 to 2020. I got to work with 25 plus CEOs that I kind of hand selected, right? I only worked
Mhm.
with people that I really wanted to work with. And I got to watch them do their thing and got to see that they're not infallible and they're just people and you're just kind of you're a person doing this
Yes.
and you pick up all the tricks. And I was able, because I was often working with 3 to 6 of them at the same time, I would be able to kind of port good things that somebody did over here and bring it over here and see what the deficiencies were over here. And then of course you're just kind of soaking that all up for yourself. And so that was really my PhD, I guess. I mean, 7 years of doing that, got involved in 65 companies as an advisor and investor.
Yeah.
So that by the time I finally had an idea that I really wanted to pursue, I wasn't scared of doing it.
Hmm.
So there was a little bit of overlap. I started Swan in summer of 2019 and gave up my last advisory gig, I think, in April of 2020, which was actually a month after Swan launched.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, and I hear you that you feel like you got your PhD there, working with all the CEOs. However, when I looked at your recommendations, it seemed like you somehow already early on knew how to collaborate with people well or work with them well. So I'm also curious, do you, I mean, others have said that about you, but do you feel that way? And if so, who taught you earlier on then?
Look, the knock on me at Mackenzie when I joined post B school, so I went to University of Chicago 02 to 04, and I went to Mackenzie, and basically the partners all love me, and they said if you can just keep your head down for like 6 to 8 years and grind it out, then you'll do business development and you'll be like a massive rainmaker here. And I always knew that I was like a BD connector strategy, kind of get things going type of person. And I typically get along with people, kind of well above my station. Historically, at the places that I was, that I just was kind of drawn to the higher level things. And even if I wasn't comped on finding new work for consulting firms, I would typically befriend the execs at the client and bullshit with them and have lunch with them and find new things for my firm to do as like an associate or a junior
Mhm.
engagement manager. So I think in my case, I was just not attracted to the long haul in banking, private equity, consulting. And I think it's just because I would look at the senior level, and while I liked some of those people, I didn't like the life,
Mm.
the function in those kind of more traditional destinations for B school grads. So I just wasn't interested in it at all. And I think that's what I think it's the variability in early stage startups, in addition to having more control over the outcome, where
Yeah.
like the outputs more closely match your inputs, whether it's
Yeah.
experience, network, intelligence, ideas, whatever it is, you kind of have more impact on the outcome. So that was attractive. But I also think the variation of function and industry of being in the startup world and how quickly things change is just intellectually interesting and stimulating.
Yeah. Do you think that your first degree was in, well, part of your degrees, you had multiple, but was in journalism? Do you think that helped you more with people as a leader, or maybe that helped you uncover the facts behind Bitcoin? I don't know.
It's probably more in the latter camp. I think, yeah, I was a broadcast journalism major. I had been very into journalism since I was a freshman in high school, and went off to school for that. And I was a really awful local NBC TV reporter by 19, 20 years old in mid-Missouri, and got it out of my system and went to work for Microsoft instead. But I still entered Microsoft through the content side of things. So
Mm.
it was actually right after they had done the joint venture with NBC and created MSNBC, which was not a partisan outlet at the time. It was kind of down the middle. Yeah, so it was a bit of technology, it was a bit of content, and that's kind of what helped me get further into the internet world, and internet content, internet media, internet marketing, and kind of build that skill set. But yeah, I wouldn't say it was. I would say so. The thread I think you're pulling on is absolutely true, which is that I've always been obsessed with figuring out what's real and what's true.
Mhm.
And I think that runs through journalism. I think it's, in as much as I was good at some things in consulting for the 7 years that I did it, that was probably the thing I was best at, is, doggedly trying to figure out what was true.
Yeah.
And I think it also runs through the subject that I took most seriously in both undergrad and grad school was statistics.
Mm.
So I love stats and probability. And in as much as I actually have like a good grasp on anything other than the English language, it's probably stats and probability. And I think it's because I use those tools to try to figure out what's true and what's BS.
Well, then I have to say, I noticed it seems like you were one of the first people to point out that FTX was not on solid ground.
Yeah, that was a fun year. I went head to head with Swan, and then that was the Luna collapse, and then Mashinsky, which was Celsius, and then SBF. So yeah, 3 for 3 that year. They all went to jail, and all of their companies obviously went bankrupt. But yeah, it was really interesting. You're fighting it out on Twitter at the time, now X. You're fighting it out on YouTube. You're fighting it out in the media and different outlets and CNBC and things like that, and like calling a spade when very few people were doing that.
Exactly.
And it was lonely at first, because I started in March of 2022, and these things didn't start collapsing until, May, and then June, and then November. But anyway, I got really good at giving people nicknames. That was fun. I channeled my inner orange man and called the one guy Don't Quan instead of Do Quan, and then Miskamsky instead of Mashinsky, I think. That one stuck. And then the best of all was the one that ended up in the headlines, which was Scam Bankster Fraud instead of Sam Bankman Fried. So yeah, I coined that in July or August of 2022, and it ended up in some of the headlines.
Yeah, I think that must be another one of your gifts, because also I saw another podcast with you where, and forgive me, I don't know exactly how you coined it, but something like scambling, I think is what you said.
Yeah, we
What
need a
people
new
are doing.
word. We need a new word. Yeah.
So can you
Yeah.
say more about that?
Yeah, I can. So, yeah, I mean, I invented the word and posted it on election day. And then I actually explained it and did a post and posted that on inauguration day. And it's basically, it's probably the genesis of it is more looking at the non-Bitcoin crypto world over the last, 7, 8 years. And it's not pure scamming, because the participants, the trade, like the retail traders that are trying to catch a pump and, dump it before their friends do, they're kind of willing participants, but it's not quite gambling because it's fixed. The game is rigged. And so it's not the same as Vegas, where you kind of know the odds on each game and you know what the house's take is. It's 2 to 6% depending on the game, right? In the crypto world, that's opaque. And so usually the insiders, the founders of these pump and dump tokens, and the VCs that have been grifting, like Andreessen Horowitz and some of these other formerly august names, have turned into massive scam shops. They get all the insider economics. And so it's massively negative sum. It's not even zero sum. It's not PvP, taking money from your peers. It's the insiders are the only ones making money, basically.
Hmm.
So, these things can be, minus 80% negative sum. So, basically of the money that goes in, only 20% comes out to the few winners of that catch the pump early enough. And when you look at that, by the way, this is, the numerical or statistical argument for Bitcoin. Out of the 30 million plus altcoins out there, Only three of them have ever had a second all-time high in Bitcoin terms.
Hmm.
So that means that they had their pump. So the other 30 million pumped and dumped and
Yeah.
dwindled towards zero in Bitcoin terms. Only three have ever had a second pump that was slightly higher than the original one. And all of those are down at least 50% to 80, 90% in Bitcoin terms since that second pump.
Hmm.
So essentially, Bitcoin is the thing that lasts. And when you see statistics like, they talk about Bitcoin dominance, which is how much of the market cap of is Bitcoin versus the rest of like non-Bitcoin crypto, you have to remember that in the crypto side, it's different coins than they were 10 years ago or 5 years ago. So there's survivorship bias.
Hmm.
Does that make sense? So
I would prefer you to explain it because
okay, sure, sure. So basically, the index of crypto, if you take a cohort of like the top 20 non-Bitcoin coins from 10 years ago, they're all down 99% in Bitcoin
yes.
terms. But there's new pumps that have been invented and marketed by Silicon Valley scam shops with these token founders with their PhDs that are like renting their credentials to a new scam. And so there's like a new set of tokens that have been pumped.
Hmm.
Right. So
Yeah.
they're still up a little bit. And so it looks like, Bitcoin dominance is only 65 or 70%. But if you took a snapshot of that 30% today and we go
Hmm.
forward 10 years, it'll be 1%.
Okay.
They've already pumped and they will just dump
Yeah.
from now. So, yeah, so I think
The
that's,
crypto holder should look at the reality of or the risk even of having crypto
yeah, they're just
not
they're just
Bitcoin.
not for holding. Like they're just
Yeah.
not for holding. Like they're for trading. And again, that trading is actually more like scambling.
Yeah.
And
I understood
you're not the house.
exactly. Wow.
So when it comes to, XRP or Ethereum or Cardano or any of these are run by centralized teams that make decisions about the money supply. They have to, change things constantly. They have massive marketing budgets. They're recruiting bot armies on Twitter. Those aren't real people that are fanboying these things for the most part, on and on and on and on. And of course, they're making massive campaign donations to try to stay out of jail.
Hmm. Wow. Well, there's a blind spot for people who don't know about, about that crypto versus Bitcoin, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, okay. So then what led you to Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I mean it's adjacent to a lot of things that I care about. Like I'm a big history buff and I like money and I got to Milton Friedman in the aughts, but didn't quite get to the Austrians. Touched on them, the Austrian economists, but not much. So I mostly learned about, Hayek and Mises much deeper once I actually got into Bitcoin. So I had a couple of swings and misses. Like somebody gave me Bitcoin in January 2014 at a tech conference, but it didn't take. I lost it. It was just on my phone and didn't back it up and it's gone. And then in late 2015, I was helping a friend sell off like half of a set of, advisor and angel equity that he had. So we put it in a Series LLC and we were selling half of that. And, I made slides for two early Bitcoin startups in this presentation. So I did 2 slides. I did 4 slides total on Bitcoin companies, and I was just busy with other things. I was doing, digital media and ad tech and SaaS and platforms and things like that. It just didn't take. So it really wasn't until a couple bull markets ago, and there was a big price run up in the first half of 2017
Mhm.
that got really, really loud in my kind of social and professional circles, and I took a look. So, and it took me, my views and understanding of Bitcoin versus crypto is hard won because I came in mostly through the crypto side because
Mhm.
this is West Coast and San Francisco and LA is kind of the genesis of a lot of the crypto pumping. And there were a lot of earnest people that thought it was the thing, by the way. They're not all dastardly horrible scammers. A lot of them have fooled themselves or are just mistaken. So it took me about 11 months to sort through all the crypto noise and come out the other side by March, April of 2018, understanding that Bitcoin was the only one worth focusing on.
Because it was decentralized and a couple of other reasons.
Decentralized, it's immutable. There's no pump and dump team. Like it actually is, it is the discovery of digital cash that, we humans have been looking for a few decades prior to its discovery.
Yeah, very good. So do you agree that companies should have some Bitcoins part of their treasury strategy or?
If the ownership understands it,
Yeah.
right? So there's no point in trying to jam it through. It's why we focus, primarily for Swan. I mean, again, we're 5 years in, but it's still a relatively, smallish company. I guess like top line volume selling Bitcoin is probably like 1.5 billion a year or something like that. But, revenue wise, net revenue wise, I think we did a little over 11 last year.
Hmm.
So it's still a fairly small company. I think we're 80, 82 people, something like that.
Yeah.
So we are really focused on serving people who make their own decisions. So principals, not agents. I'm not trying to
Mhm.
do like a consultative sale to a bunch of people. Frankly, if you don't want somebody to talk to about your decisions, like you don't need Swan. So if you have a big staff and you're Mass Mutual and you're thinking of buying, $100 million of Bitcoin, you have a team that has similar skills and background to my team.
Yeah.
So you should just do that. So the 2,000 plus businesses that we have as customers at Swan are almost all owner controlled.
Yeah.
The owner makes their own decisions and they decide that they want to work with Swan.
Yeah. And you've built a good team because I got to talk to one of your team members, Alec, and he's responsive and patient and
Hey, I'll shout him out for sure. Yeah, Alex, amazing. We just co-hosted an event in his hometown of Salt Lake City a couple of
Mhm.
weeks ago. By the way, this is a really interesting thing that I think will be, I'm sure a lot of your audience thinks about, building communities and, what is the value of getting people together and, does that scale? Like do events scale? So what we've realized is that our cohort of private clients, I think it's 19,000 at this point. This is the first time in history that anyone's been able to get together like a qualified, curated group of people that are into Bitcoin, where
Mhm.
they feel like they're hanging out with peers that are worth their time.
Mm.
So the difference between that and like a Bitcoin meetup is the Bitcoin meetup obviously is kind of open to people. It's, kind of on, Meetup or Eventbrite or something like that, but it has fuzzy edges. And you might end up getting stuck in a conversation with some lady pitching like a real estate MLM scam because she thinks Bitcoiners have money. Or usually there's a bunch of crypto people there. And there
Yeah.
might be a scary dude in the corner that you're worried is going to try to rob you, right?
Yeah.
But because we've reached this critical mass where we have that many clients, we can go to any of 50 cities in the US and just, say, hey, we're going to be there from 4 to 7 on a Tuesday afternoon in Salt Lake City. And we had, 45 clients come out to that.
Oh, wonderful. Then your next stop is Houston, right?
We are doing, yeah, we're going to do Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin. I mean, we're doing top 50 markets every year. Okay, so now here's the really fun part for anyone in your audience that has kids. You really can get inspiration from the things your kids make you read. So my oldest, I have 10 and 7-year-old daughters, and my oldest got a big, Taylor Swift hardcover, Eras tour recap type picture book basically for her birthday in November. And she asked me to read it to her. And I'm like, it's basically a picture book. Do I really need to read this? But the first page was a big foreword just kind of describing the whole tour and everything. And in it, it said that at that tour, she performed for over 10 million people,
Mm. Wow.
right? Because it was
Yeah.
150 some dates and 75,000 people per stadium. It's 10 million people.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God, like, do we have any excuse at Swan not to be with, 10,000 people next year? Like we should do that.
So your daughter
It's
revealed your blind spot.
100%. Yeah. My daughter and Taysay. So this is Swifty marketing, I believe it's called. Swifty marketing strategy. But yeah, it's just this idea that, it's a classic thing to say in early stage startups, like do things that don't scale. But
Mm.
what scales is like when you make a personal connection because you actually went to Salt Lake City or you went to Phoenix or you flew up to Santa Rosa and let all the Napa people come out and hang out with you. Like then they become like lifelong connections and friends,
Yeah.
and then that does scale because they're going to tell everybody else to use Swan.
Yes. Yes. And especially these days, because relationships are so important in a world that tends to not focus on that.
I know, like the mountain of AI content and AI bots out there creating, social media content that's all just recommending things. Like it's never real unless you hear it directly from a human that you're looking at.
Yeah.
or that like you really just can't trust any of the information. You can't trust any of the ratings on any site that has ratings. There's always somebody that's gaming it. I mean, it's nothing is more important than the actual human connection now and the actual relationship.
Yeah. Well, then I really appreciate that you took the time to share and be open. When I booked this session, you said I can ask for anything or I can talk
Of
about
course.
anything. So then as we wrap up, though, I would love if you could share with leaders. There's a lot of new startups happening right now and a lot of entrepreneurs that are struggling, thinking they're the only one.
Mm.
What did you struggle with the most? Like if you had to pick one thing that you struggled with the most that you could help others with?
I think I probably struggled the most with, I think once you get to a certain size, not having kind of full visibility into the whole organization and everything that's happening. And, in my case, that got solved by just making sure I had absolutely spectacular people running functions, like running large functions. And, so my co-founder not only oversees the entire tech team, but also all of operations.
Mm.
So he's CTO, but he's also essentially COO.
To
And I
find a good
really,
partner, maybe.
he's great. Yeah. So that's amazing. And then on the other side of the business, I've got someone who came in as a VP product, but, had been C-level guy at Microsoft and in Asia and things like that. And so he eventually became CBO and he runs product marketing, sales, and client service.
So, Cory, as part of what you realized is to hire really good people who can take it to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, I try to hire people that I would like. I want people that I work with to be people I'd be happy working for.
Mm.
And I say that often. And I know that's not possible for every business. Like it's just not. And I think it is a big advantage, obviously, working in Bitcoin because I mean, all of us are hardcore Bitcoiners and we all see this as a mission.
Yeah,
And so we can't imagine doing anything else. So in that respect, it's different. You can really only get this with people that are, dream of being on a cancer research team or working in an ER or, maybe being a fireman or something like that. There are certain groups that are really driven to solve what it is. I didn't experience anything like this at any of the big companies that I worked at.
yeah,
And I didn't see it in any of those companies. That dynamic is kind of impossible to capture in a big company. It's probably there at the very top of some of these companies, So I've heard about really high functioning teams of the 15 executives at Amazon or something, and they're all just kind of, but even that I suspect probably more mirrors the I've got your back because you've got mine. So more of like the military bond than the mission bond.
yeah. No, that's well put. And so you said yourself you discovered too at some point the struggle of when I guess do you know how many employees it was before you were like, oh, I'm losing.
Uh, I mean, what's interesting is, we're growing a lot again now, but we grew a lot and spent a lot so we got up to, I think, 185 employees by middle of last year, so middle of 2025. And then we had a big blow up with the major investor in one of our units that's in like massive international litigation all over the world, et cetera. And so I had to lay off half the team.
Mm.
So I think it wasn't here that it started to feel like it was kind of, getting large. So I think it's really just that it's that scaling stage. It's a different set of skills. In the venture world, they always talk about kind of post Series B, which is kind of where we are. We're
Okay.
post Series B, and it's when you get to like, that what is that, the Dunbar number, 150 people, where you can't keep
Yeah.
track of people and their relationships. So, it just started to feel like, you need a different set of skills and more delegation and basically spending way more time on HR and people and org above 150 because you're just trying to make sure that people are doing the right things.
Yeah.
But again, we're very lucky that I have, people that I can really trust. So it's basically, Jan is tech, Jeremy's business, and then I just have the admin functions that report to me. So it's like legal, HR, and finance plus those two guys. And I have a strategy guy, and that's about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And this
And
seems like it scales pretty well.
and you must have a good legal person because of what you're dealing with and any recommendations on what to watch out for, prevent further.
Well, we're the plaintiff, so it's not that stressful. Like
Okay.
there's no
Okay.
downside for us, and we have external lawyers. So what I would say is for anyone that's ever thinking about that, if you end up starting a large claim, it's a whole second company. And you have
I
to
was
think
going to
about,
ask.
yeah, you have to staff it up and you have to do a whole thing. So like, yeah, my whole Q3 last year was basically, saving one company while starting a second company. And somehow we still ended up the main company up 92% year over year in the middle of all that, which was just bananas. So, all credit to the team here for kicking ass because I was, absentee 60% of the week for 10 weeks setting up a new company to handle the legal claim.
Yeah. Wow. So did you guys sleep at all?
I mean, look, I got used to it. What do they say? Like, something tragic happens and, people kind of, is it within a year they bounce back to their normal thing or they win the lotto and eventually bounce back to their baseline. So, I got back to baseline by October, November after a few months of just getting used to that. And, I was basically came down to, if you never build anything of value, nobody's going to try to steal from you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I took some pride in that. I was like, wow, we built something of massive value that the market recognizes, was worth $1 billion and somebody stole it from you. Like you can go and like people will help you get that back.
Yeah. Well, and your attitude, I'm sure, helped too to see it that way. Anyway,
Again, you just get used to it, You just get used to it. I could do a whole other episode with you in, 6 to 12 months about just like, family tragedies and things like that and how that affects business life, because like the other thing is the whole backdrop of Swan. It's like I only got to have a normal life with Swan and market for less than 4 months in 2020 because then in July of 2020 my brother collapsed and ended up having brain cancer and then he died in 22. We found out my mom had lung cancer in 21 while my brother was still battling hers. Then she died in May of last year. So like there's been no semblance of kind of normalcy
wow.
throughout all this. So I've been like, my other part-time job for years was just talking to cancer researchers and networking with all the nonprofits and trying to find miracle cures and all this kind of stuff and like fighting that battle, which was more important than what I was doing at work.
Yeah.
So it's just and I know lots of people have all kinds of tragedies that happen in their companies and around their companies and I think it's something that doesn't get talked about much. I think people
Yes.
just like try to hide it from their company, which I certainly did too, and I don't know if that was necessarily the right thing. Maybe I should have shared a little bit more with my senior team along the way. They all kind of know now, but I basically just segmented and handled it separately.
Yeah. So today, would you recommend a leader open up about that? Or does it depends on whether they're working for a corporate conglomerate or not?
I actually don't know. It'd be something I'd be interested in, hearing other people's take on. I think I have a blind spot there. I actually don't know what the right thing is, and I haven't really thought through it, because I was so focused on my own family and trying to protect the company from
Yeah.
that drama. But, I
Yeah.
could see ways that being more open about it along the way could have been more beneficial for the company too. And,
Yeah. Well,
it was a different path.
you're the only the second CEO on my show who has talked about this. And so I think I do think people are realizing it might help because it seems like a lot of people are dealing with that right now
Yeah.
and everyone's holding it in. And so then it's, how do you lead people if you're not sure what's going on with them?
Yeah.
But thank you for sharing yours.
Yeah. I will say, and we can close after that. Like, I think what's at work psychologically for me anyway is something that I think most humans deal with, which is like something bad happens to you, and then you think about like, well, other people have it worse. And so you don't really feel, especially if you're like a strong alpha leader type, whatever that combination of characteristics is that leads people to often be CEOs,
Yeah.
uh, they don't want to feel like they're wallowing in sorrow or something. So then they don't deal with it, and then it manifests and pushes out through other ways.
Yeah.
As another example, like, I worked in Tower 2 on 9/11 in New York,
Mm.
and I didn't die, and none of my friends died,
Wow.
right? So I felt guilty
Wow.
Sad about it.
Cory, you've been through a lot.
So I didn't like, I didn't deal with it,
Yeah.
but it manifested and it still came out in my life for another, probably 10 years after that. Like, I don't think I was making good decisions or doing the right things for myself or my career in a lot of ways for like another decade.
Yeah.
It wasn't really until I met my wife and, started dating her and, I had to get my shit together to to, to justify her attaching herself for this ride that I think I really kind of came out of that in a lot of ways, so it was really, I mean, I guess it was 2001 till 2009. So like 8 years basically where I think I was kind of a bit rudderless and not quite nihilistic, but I would say like didn't give a shit.
Yeah. Yeah. With what you've been through, I could see how that could happen.
Yeah,
So,
so I'm trying to be very more conscious of it given the recent kind of family tragedies and trying to map that to, what I didn't deal with on 9/11 again, because it was just there was so much worse tragedy around me that I never dealt with it for myself.
mm, yeah. Wow. And what happened to me in a whole different way with finances. I lost my entire fortune in a
Mm.
Ponzi scheme
Oh
uh,
no, I didn't
several
know
years
that.
ago. I wasn't paying attention to that, but getting through that, other people have it worse. Like people committed suicide over it. And I'm like,
Right.
oh, I'm fine, right? But then with Swan, I was like, okay, I want to make sure that safe custody that I'm
Yeah.
educating myself, as you said, that was the key, right? I was lucky that I had a couple people who I respected who were
Yeah.
into that, but family can certainly
Yeah.
impact. I changed my whole career based on the wonderful surprise of my daughter.
Yeah. That's
So
lovely. How old is she now?
she's 16 now.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And
That's
and
awesome.
she's been educating me on crypto as well.
There
And
you go.
she says, Mom, it's Bitcoin, not crypto.
I love her. Oh my God. When she's ready to intern, let me know. That's awesome.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
great. So, by the way, for your audience, I mean, people would think that I get, thousands of emails a day, but most of it comes through other channels. You guys can just email me for real. Like if you're interested in this for yourself or your family or your business, it's just Cory@swan.com, Cory@swan.com.
Wow. Well, thank you
Yeah.
for that contribution.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fine.
Yeah. So now you will have to add
I
10.
wouldn't say it on CNBC, but I feel like you have like probably a
Yes.
pretty targeted audience.
Yes. Well, I know you've got another meeting to get to, but I really appreciate your time and your openness and the contribution of your email and again, swanbitcoin.com as well if they would want to,
Yeah.
get
Hey,
educated.
swan.com. We bought the domain.
Oh,
So
you bought the domain.
we've had it for a few
Okay,
years.
thank
So,
you for
at
makes it
least,
even easier.
yes,
Swan.com.
swan.com. Yes. We even have like cool knickknacks and logos and things like that. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Very good. Thank you so
Great.
much,
Thank you
Corey.
so much.